You want to know what made the avoidant come back, not your text, not your silence, not the games, not even your absence. It was your transformation from your kitchen. The avoidant doesn't come back for the same version of you they walked away from. They come back when they sense the death of the person they could control. They come back when your energy no longer chases, no longer attaches, no longer fears. That moment when you finally stop hoping they'll return. That's the exact moment they do. Avoidants aren't drawn to closeness. They're drawn to safety. But when you stop giving them emotional shelter at the cost of your sanity, they panic. When you detach emotionally but stay grounded, they feel it. When you stop feeding the dynamic, the power structure collapses and they lose their grip. What made the avoidant come back? You stopped bleeding for love. You stopped abandoning yourself. You stopped making them the center of your universe. You chose peace over confusion. You chose clarity over chaos. You chose you. They felt the shift in your nervous system. You didn't beg. You didn't blame. You became. But the most terrifying thing for an avoidant isn't being left. It's being forgotten. When you detached for real, they lost their anchor. The avoidant returns when you emotionally detach, not when you chase, wait, or explain. You think they'll come back when you're silent, but silence with attachment still screams need. They can feel it. You're quiet, but you're still hoping, still craving their return, still checking if they viewed your story, still orbiting around their absence. And that energy, that's not detachment. That's disguised desperation. The avoidant can sense when you're emotionally tied to them even without saying a word, and they know they still have power over your nervous system. But the day you genuinely detach is the day they feel the foundation under their control begin to crack. Because emotional detachment is not about doing less. It's about feeling less. From your kitchen, it's when their opinion of you no longer shakes your sense of self, when they text and your heart doesn't race, when they ignore you and you no longer spiral, when they come close and you don't confuse it for connection. Emotional attachment is the final boundary, the one that doesn't need to be spoken. It radiates in your aura, in the way you respond, in the way you no longer try to explain your worth to someone who couldn't see it. It's when you're not pretending to be okay. You are okay. And that's terrifying to the avoidant because their power came from your emotional dependency. When you detach emotionally, your energy shifts from desperation to discernment. You don't block them to hurt them. You don't stalk them to feel connected. You don't reply out of hope. They're just another notification. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head. You stop waiting for closure. You stop trying to decode their mixed signals because you realize one truth. Someone who values you doesn't confuse you. And once your nervous system calms down, once the trauma bond dissolves, once you feel safe in your own body again, they can no longer trigger you. That's when they start to feel your absence in a way that silence never achieved, because emotional detachment creates a void, not an empty space where they used to be, but a powerful vacuum where you've pulled your energy back so fully from your kitchen. It makes them question what they actually lost. And that's when they panic. The avoidant doesn't return because you begged them. They return when you become emotionally unavailable to the version of them that left. The moment they feel your peace is no longer disturbed by their presence. They realize they're no longer relevant in your world. They come back to test if they still have the access they once abused. But something is different now. You're not reacting. You're not chasing. You're not asking questions that respect your own intelligence. You're not keeping the door half open with just checking in. Text. And you're not bleeding for someone who couldn't hold space for your heart. You've healed the part of you that wanted validation from someone incapable of offering it. You've stopped trying to squeeze love out of an emotionally constipated person. You've remembered who you are. And the moment you step into that awareness, something shifts in them from your kitchen because they were used to the old version of you, the one who excused their inconsistency, the one who believed their excuses, the one who stayed when your needs weren't being met, but from your kitchen. But now you don't flinch when they withdraw. You don't collapse when they go quiet. You don't feel unlovable when they act distant. You understand that their fear of intimacy is not your responsibility to fix. You finally understand that love isn't supposed to feel like an emotional roller coaster with no seatbelt. So you get off the ride, and the moment you do, they look back and realize you were one holding the whole thing together. That's when the avoidant starts to feel confused, because your detachment says what words never coulding, I am no longer addicted to the pain you bring. I am no longer willing to beg for scraps. I am no longer afraid of losing you because I've already found myself. Avoidants aren't used to people outgrowing the pattern. They're used to partners shrinking, chasing, explaining, apologizing for wanting love. They're used to feeling in control. But emotional detachment rewrites the dynamic. It tells the avoidant, I don't hate you. I just don't need you. And not needing someone who once held your emotional leash, that is liberation. That is power. That is the kind of peace that makes them feel exposed. Because now your healing shines a light on their dysfunction. Your wholeness reflects their fragmentation. Your groundedness reveals their instability. And suddenly, the avoidant who ran from closeness start chasing what they used to avoid. But the tragedy for them is this: by the time they come back from your kitchen, they're returning to a version of you they can't manipulate. The door might still be there, but you're not standing behind it anymore. Your emotional detachment didn't just set a boundary, it rewrote the story. It said, the chapter you abandoned is no longer being written with you in it. So when they return, they find a different character entirely. One who doesn't need closure, one who doesn't entertain false hope, one who sees red flags as stop signs, not invitations, one who knows that love doesn't have to feel like survival. And that's what truly pulls the avoidant back, not to love you better, but to see if they can still reach you. But now they can't, because the version of you they had access to no longer exists. You buried that version in silence, and out of the ashes you built someone who's not afraid to walk away. But from your kitchen, you built someone who doesn't explain their standards. You built someone who doesn't fear loneliness because they'd rather be alone than unloved. But from your kitchen, that's when the avoidant realizes they're no longer chasing a person, they're chasing a ghost. The ghost of someone who outgrew their avoidance. The ghost of someone who stopped needing them to choose you because you choose yourself. And in the end, it's not your absence that makes them come back. It's your transformation. It's your emotional detachment that echoes louder than any words you could have said. Because now you're not waiting, you're not watching, you're not wondering. You're living, and they've never felt that before. Not from you. Not like this. They don't come back for love. They come back to regain the emotional power they once had. The avoidant doesn't miss you the way you think they do. But from your kitchen, they don't lie in bed aching for your soul. They don't scroll through your photos crying about the love they lost. What they miss is the version of you that gave them power without them earning it. They miss the version of you that questioned yourself every time they pulled away. The version that stayed up late analyzing their silence, their coldness, their unpredictability. They miss the control. They miss the emotional leverage. They miss knowing they could show up when they want to disappear when it suited them and still have you waiting like nothing ever happened. What they miss isn't you. What they miss is the access they had to you. And the second that access disappears, the avoidant panics, not because they realized how much they love you, but because they realized they lost the one place they could feel safe being inconsistent and still adored. Power is the currency in avoidant dynamics. And in the beginning, they held all of it. They set the emotional temperature. They decided when to connect and when to distance. They dictated the depth of the relationship. You were stuck in emotional limbo, trying to decode their affection like a puzzle with missing pieces. And the more confused you felt, the more power they gained. Because confusion is control, but from your kitchen. And control is safety for someone terrified of intimacy. But here's the part that hits the hardest. They didn't return because they healed. They didn't return because they've suddenly become emotionally available. They returned because the power dynamic changed. You became unpredictable. You stopped chasing. You stopped explaining. You stopped offering them a front row seat to your heart while they sat in the back with their arms crossed. You pulled back, not out of strategy, not to manipulate, but because you got tired of bleeding for someone who didn't even bring a bandage. When they lost your emotional devotion, they lost their drug. Avoidants feed off emotional control. They feel powerful when they see your world revolve around them. They feel safe when you are the one doing the work to close the distance, when you're the one apologizing just to restore peace, when you're the one blaming yourself for the disconnect. That's how they manage their anxiety, by controlling yours. But when you reclaim your peace, when your nervous system stops firing off in response to their absence, they lose that control. And suddenly, they're left with the one thing they can't manage: uncertainty. Now they are confused. Now they are overthinking. Now they are wondering what happened to the person who used to orbit around their avoidance like the moon around a dark planet. That shift, that emotional detachment, it's like cutting their power supply. It forces them to confront the truth they've been running from. They were only strong in the relationship because you kept handing them the sword while cutting yourself to prove your love. The avoidant returns because they don't feel powerful anymore. They come back to see if the old version of you is still in there. The one who waited, the one who begged, the one who accepted the bare minimum. They test the waters. They say, "I miss you," or "I've been thinking about you," not because they've had a spiritual awakening, but because they want to see if the leash still fits. They want to see if they still have access to the most vulnerable parts of you, the parts that used to bend just to be chosen. But now your energy is different. You're not bitter. You're not broken. You're just unavailable in the exact way they need to feel powerful. And that scares them. Because without your emotional investment in your kitchen, they're forced to face their own emptiness, their own lack of capacity, their own avoidance of truth, connection, and accountability. And it burns not because they lost love, but because they lost the place they could hide from themselves while still being adored. You became too strong to be manipulated, too aware to be confused, too healed to be controlled. And that's the one version of you they never expected to face. That's what brings them back. That's what triggers their return, not the loss of love, but the loss of dominance. They want to know if the door is still cracked open, if their name still lights up your nervous system from your kitchen, if you'll still drop your boundaries for their attention. And when they realize you won't, that's when the avoidant either leaves again out of fear or tries harder out of desperation. But neither one is love. It's survival. It's damage control. It's them trying to restore the emotional ecosystem where they felt comfortable, where they had the upper hand, where your love was a guarantee and their effort was optional. That's the ecosystem they thrived in. And that's the one you burn to the ground with your healing. They come back to reclaim the emotional high they used to get from your pain. But now your silence isn't a weapon. It's a reflection of peace. Your boundaries aren't walls. They're doors with locks they no longer have keys to. And your love, it's no longer up for grabs just because someone wants to feel powerful again. From your kitchen, the avoidant doesn't come back out of clarity. They come back out of confusion. They don't come back because they finally get it. They come back because they lost what made them feel in control. And now they're hoping to reignite the old flame that kept them warm without ever having to step into the fire with you. But the fire's gone. The old version of you no longer exists. You're not emotionally starving anymore. You're not available for half love anymore. From your kitchen, you're not staying where you're not valued anymore. And that's what makes them come back. But it's also what makes them realize too late. From your kitchen, that the power they're looking for no longer lives in you. The avoidant doesn't miss the connection. They miss the control. They miss being able to regulate their emotions through your anxiety. They miss knowing they could withdraw and you'd rush in from your kitchen, that they could be cold and you'd burn hotter just to keep the relationship alive. But now you're not playing the game. And there is nothing more destabilizing to someone who relies on control than realizing they have none left. That's when the avoidant circles back, not out of love, not out of growth, but out of desperation to feel significant again in the place they lost it. But the person they left behind no longer lives here. That's the shock they didn't see coming. That's the storm they can't weather. And that's the exact reason they come back, because your power is no longer theirs to use. Your healing, not your silence, is what made them realize they can't recreate you. Silence without growth is just noise in their world. They've heard it before. The temporary distance, the passive-aggressive unfollow, the classic emotional withdrawal that's still secretly hoping they'll chase. That doesn't move the avoidant. What moves them is the transformation they never thought you'd make. They feel it in the way your energy no longer bends for them. They feel it in the absence of emotional urgency, in the absence of that invisible thread that once tied your nervous system to their behavior. When you heal, you don't just get quiet. You become unreachable in a way that shakes their identity. You become someone they no longer know how to approach because you've become someone who no longer seeks validation in the spaces where love was weaponized. You're not trying to be enough anymore. You are enough. And when they feel that shift, when they see that you've stopped trying to prove your worth, they realize something terrifying. You're not a placeholder anymore. You've become whole. Healing changes your entire frequency. It's not something you post about. It's something they feel when they try to engage, and nothing clicks the way it used to. When they test the waters and find no current pulling them back in. When they look into your eyes and don't see the same hunger for closeness, the same itch to be chosen. That's the moment it hits them. They can't recreate what they once had with you because what they once had wasn't love. It was power over a wound that you have now closed, but from your kitchen, sutured, sealed with truth and self-respect. You're no longer acting from trauma, from fear, from loneliness. You're acting from alignment, and the avoidant doesn't know how to connect with someone who's no longer operating on emotional survival. They're used to fragmented love. They're used to messy, inconsistent, insecure attachment. But you became solid. You became grounded. You became the version of yourself that doesn't chase connection. You create it with people who are emotionally safe. They don't miss the version of you that was whole because they never saw that version. They miss the version that made their avoidance easier, the one who tolerated their distance, the one who internalized their withdrawal as your fault from your kitchen, the one who thought loving harder would finally make them stay. But now you don't play those games. Your love isn't a gamble anymore, but your heart isn't up for auction to someone who can't commit. Your value doesn't fluctuate based on who validates it. And that unnerves them because they were the sun in your sky once. But now you are your own source of light. Your self-love shines so brightly that it exposes the cracks in their foundation. You're no longer the person they could twist with a look, a text, a disappearance. You're no longer swayed by breadcrumbs. You're no longer hungry for their attention. And that, to an avoidant, is unsettling because now they're not returning to a space they once controlled. They're walking into a territory that no longer feels familiar, and that territory is you. Healing doesn't just mean you stopped crying. Healing means you remembered who the hell you are. Healing means your standards got so clear, your energy became so calm, your boundaries got so strong that chaos doesn't know where to land anymore. The emotional roller coaster is closed. The ride is over. And now, from your kitchen, when the avoidant tries to come back, they realize the ticket they used to get in doesn't work anymore. You don't respond the same way. You don't make it easy. From your kitchen, you don't make it anything. You're not trying to make it work. You're not even striving. You're thriving. You're finally breathing without holding your breath, waiting for them to come back. You're no longer frozen in the waiting room of their emotional immaturity. You left the building. And they feel that in their gut, not because you slammed the door, because you stopped standing in it. The avoidant realizes they can't recreate you when your responses change. When your triggers no longer fire, when the trauma bond finally snaps, when you stop interpreting their silence as your inadequacy and start seeing it as their incapacity, that kind of healing hits them harder than any goodbye ever could. It says, I've evolved beyond the pattern that once gave you control. It says, I love myself more than I love the illusion of what we had. It says, I no longer mistake your fear of closeness for depth. And that's when they truly feel the loss, not of a partner, but of their power. Because you're not returning to the story. You're not picking up the broken pieces. You're not waiting for closure. You are the closure from your kitchen. Your growth is the ending they never prepared for. They thought you'd always be there. They thought your heart was a revolving door they could walk through at will. They thought you'd never stop hoping. But now you'd even think about them the same way. You've rewritten their role in your life, not as the one who got away, but as the one who taught you exactly what to outgrow. They didn't just lose you, They lost the reflection of themselves that felt powerful in your confusion. They lost the supply, and they lost the emotional control, and they can't find that version of you again because she no longer exists. She became someone new, someone that doesn't need to be understood by the person who misunderstood her the most. Someone who doesn't flinch when love threatens to walk away. Someone who knows love doesn't walk away at all, and that's what terrifies the avoidant. Not your anger, not your coldness, your indifference. The fact that your nervous system is no longer activated by them. The fact that your peace is real, not performed. The fact that you don't need their validation to feel whole anymore. That's the scar they carry because they can find someone else, but they can't find you. Not the healed, whole, grounded version of you. Not the one who's self-sourced. Not the one who's moved on without bitterness. Not the one who learned how to stay soft without being weak. They can find someone to text, someone to date, someone to impress, but they'll never recreate the person who loved them so deeply and finally learned to love herself more. And when that realization sinks in, it won't be silence they remember. It will be the power of your healing, the stillness of your transformation, the calm in your energy that says, I made it out. And I'm never going back.